Welcome to the
This
journey.
thing is being recorded.
My name is Kevin Polky, and I am the host of the journey. And today I have a special guest with us, Zach Haney. He is from the Rockford area, and currently is going to my where I graduated from college at Illinois State. And so, Zach, welcome to the journey.
Yeah, it's good to be here. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, not a problem. So Zach, I know we met, probably a few months ago, and we'll get into how we met and all that. But you're from the Rockford area, graduated from Boylan, right? What does Zach do besides being a student and all the demands of being a college student? What do you do when you have an opportunity for fun?
When I have an opportunity for fun, I really enjoy playing basketball, hanging out with my buddies. I spend a lot of my time writing. Actually, I really enjoy poetry. I'd also say that me and a friend of mine are actually working on starting our own podcast too. So I was actually listening to some of your stuff last couple of weeks, just seeing how you did stuff, how you run it. And so, yeah, I mean, just little things like that, little side projects. And I like to keep myself busy and making an impact. So.
Sure. So tell me a little bit about poetry. How'd you get into poetry, and what draws you more into poetry than traditional prose?
For me, it's kind of like an artistic way to express your feelings, because I think like I really enjoy expressing how I feel through many different ways. But I'd say with poetry, a lot of times it resonates with people much better because it just sounds much more articulate, and it really connects with people. So that's how I'd say, with poetry, it just there's something special about it to me. I've been doing it for so long. I picked up, the pencil to start writing poetry like on a consistent basis, probably my freshman year of high school. I've been writing just kind of random things that I feel and think about in different topics for about 5 or 6 years now. And it really, I mean, I have some work that, I just kind of even tell my own story or other people's stories through poetry. And it's interesting how you're able to do that. So yeah.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, not that my writing style isn't necessarily uh, from a poetry aspect of it. It's more of like a short story or inspirational
Yeah.
story, thing like that. But what I appreciate that poetry brings to the table is this idea of symbolism, and that symbolism. Um, can paint even a deeper picture for people and resonate with people than just straight talking.
Yeah, and I think like that's something, when I speak from time to time, I like using a lot of analogies, and a lot of times I like to incorporate analogies into my poetry, because again, like those things, they resonate with people more, because it gives you like you can picture it, and so I just say, yeah, like with the analogies and mixing that with poetry has kind of made me much more passionate to do it. And I even like researching different analogies to incorporate into my own poetry and into my own speeches as well.
Nice. So going back to when you were in high school, what types of activities were you involved with in high school? Were you involved with
Yeah.
sports or the arts, or what were you involved with when you were in high school?
Yeah. I played a couple sports in high school. I ran cross country. I played basketball. I managed the varsity basketball team at a point in my high school career, just to, dabble into that a little bit. And other than that, I was in some clubs. I was in late crew, so pretty much we just worked with some of the incoming freshmen on feeling comfortable around campus. Um, I was a natural helper. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but
Yeah,
yeah, so
yeah.
Boylan has a natural helper program where it just kind of equips students with the tools and necessities they need to help students help themselves in a state of mental health need, and just so I was a mental health or I was a link crew leader, and I was also a natural helper. Um, and I mean, that's honestly about it. I tried to get involved in some other stuff around campus. I was in student leadership for a while as a student class president for a year or two. And I mean, that's really about it.
Gotcha. And yeah, I am very familiar with natural helpers. Actually, the former, and I'm drawing a blank of her name now. She ran it for years, and she had me come out and speak once a year to the natural helpers. Sometimes it was on suicide awareness, other times it was on other mental health topics. And the interesting part is, like, when I was at graduated from Harlem back in the 80s, natural helpers were almost in every school. And now
Hmm.
Boylan is the only one that continues to have the natural helpers
Yeah.
program. And I don't know, to be honest, I don't know, once that teacher left, I don't know if they're continuing the program or not. Because so many times those types of programs are really built around that key personality that you know that's continues to drive it and continues to stand behind it. So, um, and now at Illinois State, what year are you at Illinois State?
I'm a sophomore.
Sophomore. Okay, so this is your second year, and what types of activities are you involved with at ISU or?
Yeah. So I am currently in the Kappa Sigma fraternity. I'm the mental health chair of my fraternity. So pretty much if a brother of mine needs help with anything, I always, obviously I will always sit down and talk with him, but I always have the resources available so that if he is seeking counseling, I can provide him with those resources so he can reach out to a counselor or a professional. I also organize little events for our brotherhood, so we can all share things going on in our lives and feel connected with one another and be in tune with our mental health. Outside of that, I played a couple intramural sports. I played basketball last year, um, and I mean, other than that, I've been looking for a couple other clubs. Maybe like a club for public speaking or poetry, even. Still, in the works on that. But yeah, I mean, my major is business administration. I'm minor in sociology, so obviously my courses are a mixture of those. Um, but I love it here. I feel like it's a second home to me, and
Sure.
there's no other place I'd rather be. So
Sure. Yeah. No, I enjoyed my experience. I did 2 years at Rock Valley, and then my junior and senior year I did down at ISU, and it was a good experience for me. Matter of fact, we're taping this on a Monday. Tonight, I'll be down at ISU speaking at the Bone Center tonight. The Patrick Walsh, the president, is having me come back down to speak on managing stress and developing resilience. I was
okay,
down there in, I want to say, March of last year. I think it was March no, March of this year, 6 months ago. I was there, and I brought the SOS talk, the suicide awareness talk. Jade died from Rockford. She graduated from Harlem, had me come down, and that's where I met Patrick, and he had me come down for this week. So it'll be a quick trip down for 2 hours, and then I'll be only down there for a couple hours, and I'll be back up. So you were speaking about mental health advocacy. So tell us a little bit about your story and how'd you get into wanted to be a speaker, but then also specifically about mental health and the advocacy and awareness. It's as a general rule, that's not what most 20-year-olds are doing. But so
yeah.
what's your story?
Yeah. So pretty much, I had always been, I'd always listened to a lot of motivational speeches, a lot of keynote speeches, ever since like sixth or seventh grade. I wouldn't say I studied it, but I'd also say that like slowly over time, I became very fascinated with it, and how people were able to do it. I did, in a sense, study people like Les Brown. He was always my favorite. And Tony Robbins, guys like that. I would just study how they'd speak, and like how they emphasize certain things. And then I got into high school, and I hit a harder point in my life. I got really anxious, and I started feeling a little depressed, and I was going through a lot of internal adversity. Um, and I battled with that for a couple years, and I ended up being diagnosed with bipolar disorder. That was a hard time in my life, but seeing that I found my way through it with the help of my amazing counselor and my amazing friends and family, and a lot of determination with myself, um, I decided that I wanted to share my story so that I could turn my pain into purpose. I decided that the things that I went through, um, I choose to believe that it wasn't by chance, and that I choose to believe that I went through it and I made it through it. And I want to help people that are going through it. And I want to help people, educate people who know people who are going through those things as well. Um, I mean, again, like I said, I struggled with my mental health for about, like, pretty severely for about 3 or 4 years, most of high school. Um, it really, I started sharing my story at the end of my senior year of high school. Uh, and I think, the first time I did that, I realized, this is what I want to do for the rest of
Mhm,
my life,
mhm, mhm,
in one way or another. And it just, not it's having just even one person, knowing that I was able to impact them, whether they told me or not, is huge, because there really is no better feeling than knowing that you helped someone in their
mhm,
own struggle or in someone they know. Because I just remember back to my first time speaking, and I mean, I have still a long way to go now, but back then I was up there and I was shaking and I was super nervous and I was swaying side to side. And um, I mean, it was scary, and that sense of vulnerability was something I wasn't very familiar with, but now it's something that I embrace.
mhm.
As I state in some of my speeches, a lot of times society will lead people to believe that vulnerability is synonymous with the word weak, and I disagree. I'd say it takes a lot of strength to be open and true about what's going on in your life, whether it's positive or negative, and all experiences. And I think that's something I draw a lot of confidence from, that I'm able to share my story and that I made it through what I made it through. Again, like I was so grateful for a lot of things in my life, and that's why mental health for me at the start was such a complex thing, because I didn't understand that, a lot of it's just internal. Because I have a beautiful life, healthy family, and healthy friends and food on my plate, and I was so grateful for all of it, and that's why I was confused as to what was happening within me at the time. Um, but then the more and more I was able to and willing to understand about mental health, the more and more I understood what was taking place within me.
Sure.
So, I mean, again, and I just wanted to, post, when I really was coming out on the other side of it. Obviously, you still, with, being diagnosed with bipolar, you still face, some of those things on a daily basis. But uh, I've, due to all the time I've spent learning how to cope, learning how to handle anxiety, how to handle stress, I have become very equipped to handle my own emotions, and cope with them correctly. I journal when I start to feel down, or if I'm feeling stressed. For me, it's about being active and being proactive with how I'm feeling, positive or negative. If I'm having a great day, I'll write it down. If I'm having I'm struggling that day, I'll write it down, just to really stay in tune with your emotions. So
Mhm.
that's a big thing for me. Is not letting them control you, but also not pushing them away. You have to be in tune with them.
Sure, sure. No, I agree with you 100% on multiple levels of some things that you just talked about. You know, I was just recently re-listening to an interview with Brene Brown. She was on a podcast, and she's a social worker, and her a lot of her research is on this topic of leadership and the topic of vulnerability. And I won't get it 100% right, but she uses this definition of vulnerability is this space when we don't know necessarily what the outcome is, and we're still choosing to stay in that space, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so, like, for some people that would be public speaking, right? They talk about, the highest level of anxiety provoking is public speaking for some people. And if that goes along with what Brown talks about, this idea of vulnerability is you're in this space and you can't control the outcome, meaning how people respond to you. You can control your delivery, but you can't control how they receive it or take it, or
Mm-hmm.
whatever. And then she talks about this idea that courage is acknowledging your vulnerability and proceeding ahead anyways,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so they
Yeah.
talk about this idea of courage is there's a misnomer that courage is being able to not have fear,
Mm-hmm.
and that is, I think, completely incorrect. Courage is when you do have fear but you proceed anyways.
Yeah. No, 100%.
Yeah. So this idea of, so tell us a little bit about the journey, because I think there's a couple things, right, that I think I'd like to kind of have you just share a little bit. One is that piece of identifying when you knew something wasn't right,
Yeah.
and this was just more than just a funk, more than just a moment, that there was something bigger, and that's one thing. And then when was the turning point for you where it really kind of clicked with how to get some reprieve? And then what are those things besides, or maybe not besides, but along with being busy, being active, what are those things you do? So maybe first tell us about that whole thing of when did you, what were some of
Mhm.
the indicators that this was more than just a phase, a moment, a funk that you were in, that something else was going on? What, tell us a little bit about that piece.
Yeah. So yeah, it was actually pretty early on in my high school career. I remember distinctly. Um, I do actually have like one vivid memory of I was at a cross country practice and the practice had just got done, and I had for the first time ever some really overwhelming feelings of anxiety, and that's kind of where I started to notice over a longer period of time that everyday things that used to not stress me out as much were starting to become much more overwhelming. Um, and I was I was slowly finding myself in my head much more than I was prior to that year, and it got hard. I mean, I had always been seeing a counselor. I had been seeing a counselor for I think a year at that point already, just because I always wanted to stay engaged. And I mean, growing up, I had a very wide range of emotions. Even as a little kid, I was either very happy or I was crying just because I was a little kid. Um, but growing up though, I saw a counselor on and off, and it wasn't really until probably the end of my freshman year where I kind of realized that okay, I think I needed to see a psychiatrist and talk to my parents a little bit more about maybe taking another step in the right direction. Um, I had faced some pretty serious levels of anxiety, depression prior to being diagnosed with bipolar disorder, because I was being treated for anxiety and depression. And so, when you are on a medication that isn't exactly fit for what you are supposed to be treated for, a lot of times that can make some symptoms worse. And that's what was happening at the time. I found that point in my beginning of my sophomore year, I found myself to be feeling some suicidal thoughts, and it was hard. It was really really hard. Being especially when I would look at my friends who just seemed so happy at the time, obviously. And they seemed so happy, and they just seemed like their minds were very not simple at the time, but they're just in the moment, and I just couldn't get myself to be there. It was either I was frustrated or sad about the past, or I was freaking out and anxious about the future. um, and that was something I really struggled with, and I sometimes still do struggle with. And then things got better and things got worse. I was diagnosed. I ended up being diagnosed with bipolar disorder probably the end of my sophomore year. Um, and then it was, that was kind of, there was mixed feelings about that, because I felt like, that was narrowing it down a lot. And I felt as if I was going to find the right treatment a lot sooner. Um, and it was a good feeling, but it was also a little scary because it made it much more real in my
Mhm.
mind.
Mhm.
So when I found myself at my lowest point, that was probably about my middle of my junior year of high school. Um, that was scary. It's a time of my life where I look back and you know I made it through it, and I thank all my friends and family for it every day, and myself for fighting through it. Um, but there were times, to be honest with you, Kevin, that I didn't want to be here.
Mhm.
It was hard. Um, it was. Uh, I had a lot going on with, a lot of inner turmoil. Of like, I didn't love myself. I didn't like the person looking back at me in the mirror. Um, I didn't, I didn't believe in my capabilities like I once did. I struggled with confidence. And it was hard. I was constantly in my head every single moment of the day. I was just completely, just engulfed with all these thoughts of just like, oh, you're not good enough, you're worthless, you're a burden, like all these things I just couldn't escape. And that's how I felt at the time. And I actually ended up getting and receiving inpatient treatment from Swedish American Hospital at the psychiatric ward for adolescents. But that changed my life forever. I'm so grateful for all the people working there, because that is really what made me, in that 5 or 6 days that I was there, realize that my mental health, although I don't get to choose what I'm diagnosed with, there are things that I can do to better myself.
Mhm.
I don't have to stay in one place the entire time. I can do things to better myself so I can help myself and other people. So, when I got out of the hospital, um, even for time, for, a long time after that, it was, same story. Like I had to work through it. I had to work. It didn't just get all better automatically when I got out. But there was something different within me. And it was that I knew that no matter how hard things got, that I was going to persevere, and I was going to figure it out, and I was going to, work on my communication skills and advocate for myself. I was going to, cope properly by journaling when I felt down, um, and reaching out to my counselor and a family member or a friend. Um, it was difficult. I think that, I, in a lot of my speeches, I will talk about my time in the hospital and the time before the hospital, and then I'll kind of jump to, when I started speaking. But that time in between wasn't much easier either. It was kind of like, do I own my story or no? Do
Mhm.
I challenge myself to be real about this or no? Or not? And it was hard, because it was kind of like I knew I had made it through a certain aspect of it, but I was still facing, the daily battles that come with bipolar disorder. I was facing, those levels of anxiety still. Um, but it was just whether or not I was going to use the coping skills that I knew I could use.
Mhm.
I had sheets, I had things in front of me that I could use properly to cope, and I started practicing them over and over and over again. At the start, they didn't work because I wasn't putting much effort into them, but then
Mhm.
over a long period of time, when it became a habit, um, and I really started to dive into the importance of it, it did make a huge difference in my life. And those are still things I do to this day. So kind of going into like what you wanted me to say, or what you wanted to know about, the coping skills that I use. And in the morning, my dad got me to do this more recently. I wake up every morning and I'll throw on a positive message immediately, like within the
Mhm.
first couple minutes of my day. I whip out my phone, I pull out my computer, put my headphones in, and I listen to a positive message, whether it's a podcast, a speech, whatever it is. It's something positive to feed my mind right at the start. Um, and then on top of that, throughout the day, um, you know, like I said, I'm very vocal about my feelings. Like, when I'm feeling down, like I'll reach out for sure. But I also know the importance of being able to comprehend it within yourself as well, and be able to process your emotions. So when I start to feel anxious or stressed, like I know how to handle it at the root. Because here's the thing. Um, Even though, as I've come such a long way, I still do have those root feelings that could potentially spiral into just more anxiety and more, being stuck in my head. However, I am now equipped and skilled enough to the point where I cut it at the root. I handle it when it's at the start instead of letting it spiral. And that's where the important part lies. Taking action right at the start, whether it's about something, whether someone is facing suicidal thoughts now, or whether it's, your everyday anxiety, or whether it's, whatever it may be, handling it at the root for me, and not pushing it away, but acknowledging it is what saved my life and changed my life. So
I think there's, and I know that, you probably definitely learned this when you were in, in the hospital, because it's pretty standard, right? Is that when internally we feel chaos, right, regardless if it's depression or anxiety, one of the first things that we need to do is externally have structure that we follow through with, right?
yeah,
Kind of like, there's a particular famous, speech about, if you want to change the world, you start by making your bed.
Mhm.
And it's those little things, right? You get up, you make your bed, you put on a positive, some kind of positive message that's going to start your day a certain way, making
Mhm.
sure that that external structure that you discipline yourself to doing that, if that becomes your norm, right? When the storm comes in, when life comes in, you're able to, number one, differentiate between, is this internal or is this external? And you're able to separate that. But when everything is kind of, there's no structure, and it's, everything is kind of, I'll just go based upon how I feel. Well,
Mhm.
that could be a pretty severe roller coaster.
Yeah.
So no,
Yeah.
I think, what you're saying is 100% right on. And Kevin Hines is a individual I got an opportunity to meet a few years ago, and he actually was one of the individuals that we brought in during the month of September. I believe it's 2018, when he no 2019 when he came in, and he was one of the survivors, one of the 32 survivors who jumped off the Golden Gate Bridge. And he talked about, similar to yourself, being able to utilize that structure on a daily basis, utilizing exercise, utilizing the tools that he's learned in therapy, similar to what you've talked about, to differentiate between um, you know just my thoughts, or and how to do a reality check with those. How do I do a reality check with, yes, they are my thoughts and I have to do something with them, but just because I'm thinking it doesn't necessarily mean
Yeah,
they're
that's the
factual,
truth.
you know.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I had a teacher that became a huge mentor of mine throughout high school. Her name was Mrs. Straits. She was my health teacher of my freshman year, but we stayed so close all throughout high school. And she would always tell me, when I was first, diagnosed with with anxiety, she always told me. She said, "Here's the feeling and the thought, and then here is the outcome. Right here in between is the action, and that's what will determine what happens in your life, because these feelings, like they're real feelings, but it doesn't mean that they have to dictate what goes on in your life. Now it's very hard to make that inner choice, or that decision to be like, I can't let these feelings control me. And that's I struggled with that, and I still do a lot
Sure.
sometimes. I'll be real with you with that.
Yeah.
I do at times, but it it's about, you know like finding that gap in between where you acknowledge them, but you don't only act upon them.
Yeah.
For me, I act, um, I wouldn't say in spite of them, because I acknowledge them, but I would say that I do things to, like I said, make sure that they're taken care of. But then I balance logic and emotion. That's been a huge key for me, because I think it's important to be in tune with your emotions. But logic is what will get you through the emotions that are not meant to be there, the false emotions, the false thoughts. um, Discipline and logic has gotten me through a lot of that. And I still struggle with discipline and commitment a lot on things that I like to do, and on projects, and on working out and stuff. But it's been a huge part. Whether or not I knew it at the time, discipline is what got me through, and just committing to who I am as a person. Because you know, and I'm so grateful, and I'm so happy to be here with you today. But at a point in my life, I didn't want to be here,
Mhm.
and it was hard, and I at the time, um, I didn't want to be here, but subconsciously, over a long period of time, day by day, I made more and more of a commitment to bettering myself. And when I realized that it no longer was just about me, it's about the potential people in my life that I can impact down the road, whether it be family, friends, or maybe people that I'm blessed to speak in front of,
Mhm.
because the way I see, whenever I've been able to give a speech at an organization's event, I see that as an opportunity for me to serve. Yes, it's an honor, And yes, like it's a great, amazing opportunity. But the way I see it is that I want to serve these people and I want to help people help themselves and help people they love. Because yes, I love sharing my story, and it's hard sometimes. I will say, like it's, I've come to a point where I do own my story, but it's not like, thinking back to it sometimes isn't hard. Um, but I'm proud of myself, and I encourage people to be proud of what they've overcome, and to not run from it, to what they're facing. Because for a long time I did, and all it did was catch up with me.
Sure. Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
and that's the unfortunate truth. I mean,
Yeah.
it does. And it's understandable to want to run from it because it's scary. But like you said earlier, courage isn't not being afraid at all. It's being afraid and still going through it and still facing it. And that's something I had to grow in strength of. It is just being courageous in those situations.
Yeah. And I think there is that element, especially early on, when a person is doing work with themselves, right? Doing work on themselves, their mental, emotional state. There's usually a theme, right? Where
Yeah.
if someone has had trauma in their life, let's say sexual assault, abuse, whatever it may be, some kind of trauma, they see themselves differently than others because of the trauma.
Hmm.
Other times people may have navigated through life and not had big T trauma, right?
Yeah.
But they remember there was a time period in their life where things came easier, and now they don't, right? Like I've seen this happen with kids that are fall in the category of gifted, and they grade school, middle school, whatever, they didn't have to study, they didn't really have to, it just came really easy. And then all of a
Yeah.
sudden something shifts. Either one, everybody's caught up to them, and now they have to put forth the effort because just the
Hmm.
natural doesn't work. And so I think there's everybody has their own story about what ends up shifting, right?
Yeah.
And it could be due to some external thing, or it could be something internally shifts. Like you said,
Yeah.
the anxiety and the depression started developing into a different type of mood disorder, or maybe all along what was presenting was anxiety symptoms and depression symptoms, when really the core problem or diagnosis was bipolar all along. It just hadn't revealed itself fully yet. That it hadn't fully emerged. And I think that takes, like you said, some persistence of going and asking for help, being willing. The fact that you had already started seeing a counselor for some other things was probably a huge thing for you by the time you got into high school, when things started getting darker.
Sorry about that.
Yeah, that's okay. That's okay.
Um,
Yeah, you were just saying that it was hard. I caught that part of it. And I think we were talking about that transitioning from, that piece when you had symptomology to the real development of the bipolar disorder.
yeah. So pretty much, when I was diagnosed with bipolar disorder, I had always personally felt like it was bipolar because I had known a lot about it. People I knew suffered with it. Um, we had to do projects on it in health class. I was just educated on it at the time for what I thought. And I always felt like that's what described me. I'd have these stages and it's a little different for everybody with bipolar, but for me, it would be stages of weeks at a time where I'd be on top of the world. And then, stages of times where I would be, feel like I was at rock bottom. Um, and so, I finally advocated for myself that I thought that's what it was. And people in my life, because they didn't understand it, and no ill will towards them, they didn't understand what it was, or like what what true bipolar is, and so they kind of were dismissive of that idea, simply because they weren't educated at the time.
Mm.
But then I talked to my counselor, I talked to my psychiatrist, and we kind of did a lot of those questionnaires and a lot of the other things, and I was diagnosed with it. And the people in my life who not were dismissive of it but didn't understand it educated themselves so much on it. so that they could understand. And then it made sense to them. Because there's, like I said, a lot of the reasons why people in my life didn't think that I had bipolar was because of the stigmas that surround bipolar. And I just had to kind of say, even my younger self was kind of like, that's not the case for every person. It's the same for everything. Every sickness might react differently to different people, whether it's physical or mental or whatever. It's different for everyone. But when the people in my life, and I'm very, very grateful because I was blessed with family and friends who were willing to educate themselves. And I think like that's something that was a huge part of my journey, was having the support system I had. And I know, unfortunately, a lot of people do not have access to that, but that's what I'm trying to, one person at a time, just educate people on what it's like to be on my side of the story. But I've also, I've lost people I know to suicide, and people I a lot of people I know struggle with mental health, and so I know what it's like to be a listener, and I know what it's like to be listened to. And I think like empathy is what has helped me connect with people so well. Obviously I love public speaking. I'm just so excited to continue to grow as a public speaker. But I really enjoy just one-on-one conversations, learning from each other's stories and what we've went through, whether it's related to mental health or it's, other experiences we've had in life. That's really where I just connect with people so well on. And I think that does stem from what I went through with myself. And I think like it's that's not, I don't want to say that's a controversial statement, because I'm not saying that what I went through was a positive, but what I do choose to draw positives from it. I choose to draw strength from what I went through, instead of looking back at it and, seeing it as this fully negative experience. Because it was obviously, like I've stated, it was not an easy time, and it's still not always easy, but it's not meant to be. The way I see it now is, I was faced with a choice, and I'm faced with a choice every day. I'm like, am I going to pick myself up and better myself today? Am I going to, fight? Am I going to, or am I going to sit amongst the, my anxiety and my worries? And I think, there has to be a level of understanding that it's okay to not always be okay. I think like that's something I always beat myself up on too. Like back in the day, I would be super frustrated because everybody around me in high school would seem like they're super happy, which is obviously, when we're all vulnerable to a certain extent, we learn that's not always the case, because we don't know what's going on in people's lives. But at the time, to me, it seemed like everyone else was so happy and just content. And so I felt lost and I felt alone. And, but I came to learn that it's okay to not always be okay. You just, it's be understanding of where you're at. You don't have to always be perfect, or you don't have to be perfect, because that's just not the reality of life. And I just had to not be so hard on myself, to force myself to be happy. And so when I understood that, and it's still a concept I am still getting, more comfortable with, just because in social media, everybody always shows their happy side, which is obviously, it's great. But I also think like it can subconsciously do things to a person who's only seeing positive things on social media, with other people, oh, my car, oh, my house, oh, my happy, like my happy family, which is amazing. But, when that's all you see, and if you're at a low point in your life, you're going to be like, well, why am I not happy? And that's kind of what happened to me in my day-to-day life. I fell into that self-comparison thing, or that self-comparison trap, and it was hard to get out of. But I found my way through it. And I think, being bipolar obviously has its many struggles, but I'd also say that there's a part of me that is grateful for it, grateful for the burden, because I connect with people on a much deeper level because of it. And that's what I choose to pull from it. I shouldn't call it a burden, but I would say, like, it's the way I see it is that, yes, it's a cross that I bear. It's a struggle that I was given. But it's the way I choose to see it is that I connect with people on a much deeper level because I feel much deeper. So, I mean, it's just the way you perceive things. I had to change the way I perceive things, and that changed my life.
Yeah. Well, Zach, I so appreciate. I'm looking forward to having you at our SOS event this coming Thursday, and I'm looking forward to hearing your talk that day. But and I'm happy for you and your story. You know, and like many, it's not about talking. There is a portion of the story that's talking about the past to
Mhm.
give a frame of reference, but it's about
Yeah.
living it now, right? and
Yeah.
that's and that's really the big part of what I heard you say about your message. It's about what you're doing with it now is really the message of hope and
Yeah.
possibility, because I, even if just one person listening can identify with what you're saying, that means if Zach can do it, then maybe I can do it too.
Yeah.
And so Zach, I appreciate you. If someone wanted to get a hold of you, what's the best way for someone to get in contact with you?
I would probably just say my phone number, if that's all right.
Yep,
Um, so my phone number is 815-298-8695. And I'll also give you my email, which is just zachhaneylife@gmail.com. So
perfect.
ZACHHANEY life@gmail.com.
Perfect. All right, Zach. Well, thank you again for being with us, and I appreciate the journey that you're on and your willingness to be vulnerable and courageous to share it. So
Well,
thank you.
thank you for having me on here. It's been a blessing.
And if anybody who's listening can identify with anything that Zach talked about, or know someone who needs to hear this particular episode, definitely please share it. We will be capturing Zach's talk at the SOS fundraiser this coming week, and we'll be able to have access to that as well. So again, I appreciate you guys for being here, and look forward to being with you next week.